Hi Rupert, how are you?
Hi, Simon. Good to see you again. Very well, thanks.
Good, lovely to see you too. Jamie, how are you?
Good, thank you. Nice to meet you both.
Lovely to meet you too. So I better start actually by introducing myself. So my name is Simon Mundie, and I'm really just here as a layman of sorts to facilitate a conversation between Rupert, who I'm sure all of you who are listening are very familiar with, and Jamie, who I'm sure some of you are familiar with, but perhaps not quite as many. So before we dive into the subject, and we're talking about acting, because Jamie is an acting whose star is, should we say, rising rapidly. But we're talking about acting. We're talking about it as a metaphor for life, for reality, all that kind of thing. But obviously, I think the best place to start really is an introduction to you, if that's all right, Jamie. So, um, you are an award-winning actor, a writer, producer. As I alluded to, you've got a very exciting career trajectory. It seems the general consensus from the research I've done is that you're definitely going places. But let's start by digging into your story, if that's all right, and how you arrived here with your interest, both in acting but non-dualism. How very much you're interested in Rupert's work in particular. But let's start way back when you were a wee lad raised in a small country village in Scotland, by your father. And you've told me previously that you were a bit of a loner and film was your companion. So could you pick up your story from there, please?
Yeah, so I grew up with my dad, and he raised me, and circumstances were such that I did spend quite a lot of time alone, and a companion, as you say, was film and television and cinema. And it was a source of adventure, information, culture, and education. I didn't enjoy school. I didn't do terribly well at school, so I did glean a lot from film and television. It was a source of companionship and comfort and optimism, really.
I've read that you spent a lot of time at your local video shop. Were you its most frequent visitor?
Yeah, I'd say so. There was a little shop in the village called Music and Movies, and I developed a friendship with the owner. He was a roadie for bands, and so it was a sort of hobby shop for him. But it had this really old, musty smell, and these old VHS cassettes, and floor to ceiling display, and and quite a broad spectrum of film titles. So I just go in and fill my arms or fill a bag, and he'd let me borrow stuff or hire, rent stuff that maybe was older than I was at the time. So yeah, I saw a lot of a very diverse spectrum of films, and quite old films, classics, some foreign films, uh, and yeah, it was a little Aladdin's cave for me. So.
So even at that point, did you have a hunch that acting and film was where you wanted to go?
No, no, not at all. No, I left school early. Again, with next to no education, and I was stood in a building site one day,
Well,
and
before Jamie, just quickly, how old were you when you left school?
15, 16.
And you left, you say, with little qualifications, so you didn't enjoy your
No,
school
no,
experience.
no, I didn't enjoy it. No criticism to the school. It was a good school, but it's just a personal experience. It wasn't for me. Some bullying when I was younger, but then I just struggled. There was a sort of feeling of one's head banging against the wall, and yeah, so I left as soon as. And
And your dad was all right with that?
I think my dad's very supportive of my path. He's a constant, so yeah, I presume so. He didn't say too much.
So okay, so there you were at a young age, left school. You knew you had this crutch, if you like, this love of film, but you didn't know where you were going. So where did you go once you left school?
Well, as I almost alluded to there, I was working on a building site one day, and stared out into the void and wondered what the hell I'm going to do with my life. And the only thing that was a constant source of pleasure and enjoyment was film and television. So I thought, oh, maybe I'll be a filmmaker, So I scraped and cheated my way into a college in Glasgow to study filmmaking. But several months in, I realized it wasn't for me. And in a new city, in a new environment, I became more aware of facets of myself that I wanted to polish. So,
So you say facets of yourself that you wanted to polish. Is that another way of sort of saying that there was a certain amount of internal disquiet, and you were looking for answers about reasons for why you felt a certain way, insecurity, anxiety, etc.?
Yeah, nothing overtly unique to myself, but yeah, just quite an apparent social anxiety. Maybe some emotional blockages from childhood.
What sort of trauma stuff?
Yeah, and just a feeling of not fully baked, like just looking back, a lack of metacognition and sort of a number of coping mechanisms, and I'd sort of dabbled in solutions earlier. I'd explored yoga and judo and read books of meditation, but it was all local. My dad would drive me to a judo class in the next village. I would go to the library and find books on yoga or meditation. But when I was in Glasgow and I tried filmmaking, it didn't work. That's when I threw myself into it for 10 years and traveled the world.
Yeah. So when you dived out of film college, I'm not sure if that's the right word, but you sort of say it wasn't right for you. Did you think that was the end of your acting artistic journey?
I don't know about artistic. I don't know about, and I'd never, to this point in this timeline, I'd still not thought about being an actor. I'd considered trying to become a filmmaker. That didn't work out. And then I focused on going to learn with different teachers and masters in different disciplines, from martial arts, spiritual systems, meditation techniques, Tai Chi, Qigong, meeting various people, Sufis, from Costa Rica, from the mountains of Costa Rica to the jungles of Borneo, and there was always a dissatisfaction.
Sorry, sounds like a song. That
I'll take the high road, you take the low road.
So you had this sort of yearning to go off on a bit of an adventure, internal and external. And so you say you spent the best part of a decade studying all sorts of things in all, from Asia to South America, studying Tai Chi to martial arts to yoga. You name it, you've done it, right? Yes,
studying breathing techniques with Russian breath masters and learning things from former Spetsnaz members, the Russian military, Qigong, Tai Chi, different other martial arts, various spiritual disciplines, and spiritual, religious, things from Buddhism, Taoism, and everything in between. And later, slightly less known or less discussed things like hesychasm from Russian, it's Christian mysticism and Sufism and so on and so forth. So,
are you familiar with all of those things, Rupert?
Oh yes, I'm sure he is.
I'm familiar with the later things, not some of the more esoteric martial arts, but yes, hesychasm and that kind of thing. Yes.
Okay. And Jamie, when did you come across or become immersed in or become interested in non-duality specifically?
Late. Although, of course, when you look back, you realize that, the term the Tao can be replaced with God or nature or awareness. Again, a lot of that understanding is thanks to Rupert. But
if I could interrupt, Jamie, you're not old enough to say you came across non-duality late.
Okay, that's good. Okay, I'll accept that. But yeah, it was later, and like I said, looking back, perhaps I was aware of ingredients through other sort of filters, but the term, and what attracted me is the sort of universal umbrella. It was devoid, or certainly less cultural baggage. Because I was often put off by the cultural bells and whistles, or confused and then subsequently put off by cultural bells and whistles, the need to maybe learn an ancient language or follow a particular ceremonial protocol, or to dismiss other approaches just because this one's quite defensive. So non-dualism was it was a refreshing, unbound, it's ironic now when you read. I watched an interview with Rupert recently, and is it Shantena Sabedini,
Yes.
who seems a lovely man, and the classic, the Tao that can be described is not the Tao, or whatever it's ironic that people get attached to the word Taoism, or the bells and whistles around it. So, I was really struck with non-dualism, and then I started to kind of look at different sources of information, and that's how I eventually found Rupert. So,
and look, I know acting was in many ways the final piece in your spiritual jigsaw. We'll come to that. I don't want to come to that just yet. But would you say that of all those mystical terms that you've sort of mentioned, so non-duality or non-dualism, that's your home, spiritually speaking, now?
Definitely. I mean, also at the same time, I learned the term, the perennial philosophy, and understood that's meaning, which excited me, and read some material, or some a lot. I can be quite obsessive once I discover something that I'm interested in or that I'll benefit from. So, but yes, definitely. If you were going to pin me down with a label, I would say non-dualism is the umbrella that I proudly hold above me.
Beautiful imagery. And just a little side note, something I think quite reassuring, and I think I and a lot of people will be able to relate to you on this front, is that struggling to some degree, and it is along a spectrum, with a bit of insecurity, dissatisfaction, malaise, whatever it is, and all its forms, can end up being a gift, because it can often lead us to the spiritual path. And that's what happened with you. Rupert, I want to ask you, was your own spiritual quest, I don't know the answer to this, was it born of any internal disquiet for you?
Yes, very much so. Although it wasn't any particular situation or circumstance, but yes, it was really born of the desire to find a source of lasting peace and happiness. It became fairly early on in my early 20s, although I had been on a spiritual path for some years before this, but really by the age of 21 or 22, it had become completely clear to me that to invest one's desire for peace and happiness in anything objective was destined for failure and disappointment. And so this question, in what can we find happiness? Where does happiness lie? What is the source of happiness? This formulated itself in my mind quite early on.
There wasn't there a case of having your heart broken that was quite foundational?
Yes, I think that was really the event. If I was to attribute, although as I say, I had learnt to meditate, and I was studying the classical Advaita teaching for some 5 years or so before this, from my mid-teens onwards. But it was yes, when a relationship, the first ever real relationship that I had, and in my my naivety, I thought we were just going to have 4 children and live happily ever after together. And it was when that relationship came very abruptly and suddenly to an end that I was just faced with this just stark fact that I had invested my entire happiness in in the objective content of experience, in this case, a relationship. And it finished on the phone in a 2-minute phone call. And so that this whole, and I, of course, as I say, I had projected this relationship really forward for the rest of my life, and my future happiness was kind of crafted around my vision for this relationship, and it just ended so abruptly that I was just left staring this stark fact in the face. You have allowed your happiness to be dependent on, in this case, on someone, and this relationship, it can just end in a moment. In my case, it was a 2-minute phone call. And this was, although I'd been deeply interested in these matters, I had already learned mantra meditation. As I say, I was exploring the non-dual teaching in the classical Advaita Vedanta tradition. But this incident really injected intensity and passion into something that was already a deep interest for me.
It's interesting, I think, the idea of anxiety or disquiet or even trauma, and how actually it can be something of a blessing. And obviously our minds like to label things as good or bad, but clearly to varying degrees for all three of us. For example, I mean, I hold my hand up very much so and say that, you know, my path to Rupert, without putting you on too much of a pedestal, Rupert, certainly was born of my own insecurities and so on and so forth, and things, you know, that old question of why me, and this shouldn't be happening, etc., that now I'm able to look back on and be actually grateful for, because it was the fuel that prompted me to go looking and actually eventually find, not necessarily my way home, as I'm not there yet, but anyway, I'm rambling, but you know what I'm getting at. So just a quick comment from you both, really, on how I don't want to use the word trauma again, but how the simple one, disquiet, how internal unease can actually be something of a gift if it does propel you in a direction of, for example, finding out our true nature. To what degree, Jamie, why don't you start? To what degree do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I think I don't think there's anything wrong with any thought or emotion. I think all thoughts and feelings are natural. It's only unnatural when they stay around for too long, you know, and whether that's, even so-called positive thoughts or feelings, if it's excessive, it becomes, you know, acidic or corrosive. I think if we're going to operate in the realm of thoughts and feelings, then it seems that, you know, all thoughts and feelings are natural. They rise and fall, they come and go. But sorry, what was the question?
That's all right, Jamie. Really, to what degree internal disquiet can be a blessing if it propels you on a path towards truth, let's say?
Well, it's perhaps a bigger question. It's a big question because, so there's that comment I just made, which I still find is relevant. But also, you know, if you're talking about it creatively, you know, art is generally about humans. It's humans creating art about humans. Even if it's a painting of animals, it's by a human through the perception, the perspective of humanity. This is how we see this animal. So, or it's obviously pictures or paintings of humans, or a pot, you know, is made by a human, and if it's perceived as a practical object, it's used by a human, or even if it's purely ceremonial, it's, you know, so the human experience, the drama of life is valid because the more you're aware of it and the more you're in touch with it, then you have something to say, you know, creatively, something to share or to highlight, you know.
Rupert, can I just ask you, I know you say often at your retreats and things like that, that a lot of the people, or most of the people, if not all of the people there, are brought there because of a search for lasting happiness, which is
Yes, almost all people. I think there are really two reasons that people approach a spiritual path, two questions. One, what is the nature of reality? And the second, how may I find lasting peace and happiness? I used to say that 20% came through the first channel, which is more philosophical, what is the nature of reality? And that 80% come through the second, which is more driven by feeling, by emotion. How can I be happy? How can I find lasting happiness? I think now, after writing and speaking about these matters for 12 years or so, I would say 90% come through some feeling of dissatisfaction, some feeling of suffering, some feeling, as you say, of disquiet, and say 5% philosophically, what is the nature of reality? So yes, I think almost everyone's spiritual search is initiated by the desire to find lasting happiness. And most people don't seek lasting happiness unless they are miserable, unless they are unhappy, unless they have tried for a number of years to find happiness in the world. That's why a lot of people, it's actually changing, I think, now, but let's say at least until recently, why a lot of people came to the non-dual approach fairly late. Most of us tried everything else first: objects, substances, activities, special states of mind, relationships. And when all of these things failed us, often enough, then we get to the position that the prodigal son was in. We tried everything, nothing. There's nothing else on offer in the world, and that leads us either to despair, as it does in some cases, or it causes us to turn around, or a chance meeting, or we come across a book, and we get introduced to this approach. And it is for this reason that the Shankaracharya, my first teacher, he used to tell a story, which you probably both heard me speak of before. One of his disciples, a woman called Kunti, who had one prayer in life: Lord, please give me some adversity, because it is only in adversity that I remember you. And that is, of course, spoken in religious language. But if we were to translate that into contemporary terms, in response to your question, Simon, is it not some form of disquiet that brings us to this understanding? Yes, that we could say that. I'm not sure that we would pray for some form of suffering, but certainly that when we are suffering, it is only when we are suffering that we are motivated to ask the deeper questions of life. What is this all about? It is not just about fulfilling the providing pleasure for the senses. What am I really here for? What's the meaning of life? How can I really be happy? And for the vast majority of us, suffering causes us to ask this question.
There's something reassuring then, is there not, about that fact that suffering can actually ultimately lead to happiness?
Yes, reassuring if we are fortunate enough at that moment to come in contact with someone or something that helps us to use our suffering in a positive, creative way, namely to begin to explore who is it that suffers. When I say I am miserable, instead of getting deeply involved in the misery, to explore, but who am I? Who is the self that is suffering? That I'm always, if I'm not lonely, I'm upset, and if I'm not upset, I'm tired, and if I'm not tired, I'm excited. Who is this one that always stands at the heart of my suffering? So yes, if we're lucky enough during our suffering to meet someone or something that helps us to orientate ourselves with respect to our suffering in a positive, creative way. Because if we don't, unless of course it happens spontaneously, which very, very occasionally does happen, but for a lot of people that don't come across this possibility, suffering can just lead to despair.
So you used the word luck and fortune, and And so, but on the one hand, obviously, it can propel you to be like, I have to find an answer, whereas another might be to turn around and either wallow in it or like you say, be stuck in despair. Is that luck?
No, Simon. When I say luck, it's just just using common parlance to find a word for something really that we don't understand. Why is it that two people, two siblings, for instance, brought up in the same family, the same parents, the same circumstance, the same education, the same background, and so on, but both suffer more or less equally? One of them becomes deeply interested in spiritual matters, begins to investigate the nature of their self, engages in some form of meditation or practice, and another becomes a drug addict and lives in despair. How can we account for this without building a whole model of past lives? And so when I say luck and fortune, it's really just a
mystery,
way of saying we simply don't understand. Why is it that one person, against all odds, finds themselves passionately interested in these matters, and another person who is possibly brought up by parents who are deeply interested in these matters has no interest in them at all? So when I say luck and fortune, I just mean we don't really understand.
So, Jamie, you looked like you were going to say something there.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the word suffering, because obviously, as Rupert teaches often, it's the result of resistance. That's to explain it correctly. So again, that's what I was trying to go towards in my previous answer about, particularly as an actor, that the suffering is a resistance to random thoughts and feelings. And there's sometimes a risk of someone trying to control thoughts or feelings, or suppress thoughts or feelings, or change thoughts or feelings, rather than to, as Rupert often teaches, to welcome them or surrender to them or to recognize or legitimize them. So when resistance, the energy of resistance, is pulled out of the equation, this, if not none, then there's far less suffering as a result. So yeah, it's interesting if we take the conversation towards creativity. And what I thought your question earlier, that's why maybe I was rambling or vague, was, is there a benefit in having trauma or difficulty or challenges in life? Is it a necessity or a benefit in regards to becoming a creative person or an artist? Because arguably, you don't want to have, again, Rupert often talks about, it's not about going away to a cave and disappearing in a sort of non-dualistic bliss. It's about, to use my own language crudely, it's about sort of sorting yourself out and then coming back, like the famous Zen ox drawings, coming back to the village with the hands open to come back down from the mountain and of more usefulness in society, or in your family at least. So again, it's not necessarily to remove the activity of thoughts or feelings, because, especially as an actor, I need to engage with them. In a way, I'm paid to go into the into the gutter of the human experience, and I'm paid to temporarily identify with things that maybe in my own personal life, if I'm sat in the sofa or going for a walk along the river, I'll let go of, in order to abide in what is described as awareness. So,
Just to return quickly to both your stories, in fact, because there is a little parallel, I think, in that. So, Jamie, you spent 10 years gallivanting around the globe, studying with various masters, but you came back and you didn't feel like you'd quite, shall we say, cracked it. And the same is true of you, Rupert. I know that obviously you spent a long time doing meditation with the Study Society, etc., etc. And then the key moment for you, Rupert, as I'm sure anyone who follows your work knows, is obviously when you met your teacher, Francis Lucille. and that's when you were able, from that point, to make this teaching your own, and really inhabit it. Whereas for you, Jamie, am I right in saying the key moment actually for you was when you acted?
Yeah, yeah. So I've got a very close friend, Peter Marsden, who's a filmmaker, a very talented one, and because I was quite physical and I had a background in boxing and martial arts, whatever, he'd asked me to come on to a music video that he was directing, and it was predominantly just doing some pad work, some bag work, some shadow boxing, and generally trying to look like a boxer. But on the last day, and there was quite a budget, and the musician was quite well known, and there was other actors involved, and so there was some pressure there. On the last day, there was a scene where Peter had just turned around and said, "Okay, so this is the scene where your coach is murdered, and you have to be upset. You know, you might need to cry or indulge your emotions, or you have to." Go and attend to him, and then he dies, and you're really upset, and you have to do this and do that, and basically I had to act, and I could feel everything that I thought I had come to grips with through previous attempts, martial arts, spirituality, religious disciplines, esoteric, mystical practices, gone. I was back to completely naked and vulnerable, and at the mercy of these energies which have, impeded me in some shape or form. And at that moment, I knew I was facing my real opponent. I was aware of. I was immediately aware of my sort of psychological front line. The battlefield, and for some reason, I think because I didn't want to embarrass myself or let Pete down, I'd stepped off the cliff, and I committed to the scene, to the material, and it went well, and Pete was pleased, and I was hooked, addicted immediately. I realized that is how I recognize what's going on inside, and then if not, yeah, and at that time I thought I would remove it, but I'd offer a different perspective now rather than removing these things. But that was my path, acting. It became not out of a need for fame or fortune. There's far quicker ways to get famous or rich, like but it was out of a selfish need to. This was the process of which I would find relief from the things that hold me back or burden me or make life a bit more difficult than it needs to be. And that was it.
So there was something about Peter's invitation that both provoked a resistance in you, but also gave you the opportunity to, as you say, jump off the cliff, go through that resistance,
Yes.
and live and act from a place that was not dictated by it.
Exactly.
And that must have been totally liberating.
Exactly. Immediately, it was
transformative. You realized that your resistance didn't have power over you unless you colluded with it. But in this moment, because, as you say, you didn't want to let Peter down, you didn't collude with it. You pushed through it. And then you were in this open space of acting where your resistance was not dictating to you, and
Exactly.
that's accompanied by such joy, because you are liberated from the resistance, which is the activity of the ego. So in that moment, you were living, even though you were acting miserable, but you were
Yes.
enjoying it. You were in joy, even though you were acting miserable, because you were liberated from the tyranny of resistance, which means the tyranny of the ego in yourself.
Jamie, what would have happened, do you think, if you'd been asked to, or been told that they wanted you to act that morning, as opposed to just before you actually did it?
I'd have made some excuse. I'd have told a white lie. I'd have done everything I could. It's just, I'm not. If on paper, you wouldn't think I was drawn to acting. Like I said, I grew up with some degree of social anxiety, a relative loner, not necessarily a quiet, a weird mix of introvert and extrovert, which perhaps everyone is, but
Yeah.
Just not an overtly outgoing or gregarious or this type of person that you'd think, all the things that perhaps challenged me if on paper were like, well, that's acting's not his path, but I realize now that I tend to go towards what's difficult, like instead of going toward what's easy. Like I had a fear of confrontation. I was bullied when I was younger, had a subsequent fear of confrontation and perhaps violence. So what did I do? I learned martial arts, I don't think it was to build a barrier in the same way some people accumulate muscles to around maybe a sense of inferiority. It was more that I really wanted to go to the anvil and see if I could smash this thing honestly. Like, I do think even at that young age, it wasn't looking for coping mechanisms. Like the fear of confrontation will remain, but now I know martial arts. It was like, no, if I do destroy the fear of confrontation, I'll also let go of martial arts. It's done its job. It wasn't an identity thing it was a practicality. So acting was the same. I realized that on paper, I would be a terrible actor because I'm self-conscious and have social anxiety, and I'm not known, have no background in being bravura or gregarious. So I'll become an actor and it'll heal me. It'll become my spiritual path, my spiritual process.
Yes, because you say that a quote of yours, and I'm doing it from memory here. I think acting is the greatest catharsis, the greatest spiritual process. Was that your
For me,
quote, Jim? Yeah,
I wouldn't speak on behalf of other people, but for me, yeah, because it's a chance to both fully immerse yourself in the human experience, but at the same time, through a sort of metacognition, step back from it. So there's very much an on and off. You kind of start. I mean, again, we can get technical later, but there's a sort of starting from a position of awareness, and then drawing lots of circles, to use a Rupert analogy, and then finishing in a place of awareness.
and just the final thing before we leap into my discomfort zone around art and acting specifically. Another similarity between the two of you I've noticed is that, so Jamie, you have embraced the fact that you're not professionally trained, as it were, as an actor.
No, that's the first time it's been said live. It was a dirty secret for a long time because, I worried that I'd be judged as incapable or not deserving or not worthy in certain circles.
Don't worry, listen, I'm a sports bro. I pretended to be a football fan for a long time, so I can relate. But Rupert, for you as well, you are a teacher. I know you don't call yourself that, but I think for someone like Jamie and for someone like myself, that's how we see you, and that's how a lot of people see you. Yet you too don't have you don't have a qualification in non-duality on your the wall of your study in Oxford, do you? And this is, sorry, let me, if I just quickly finish, because we live in a time where everyone, the importance of having letters after your name or a qualification or whatever you've done, your 3 years, you've done RADA, whatever it may be, it's held in such high stock. Yet here we are with two of you, Rupert with as someone who is a spiritual teacher of the very highest magnitude or caliber, sorry, and Jamie, someone whose acting career is absolutely starting to soar. Yet, actually, neither of you have any formal qualification.
The likely lads.
Yes, well, I don't know that there are any such qualifications in my field. It's not something that you can train formally for and get a certificate, although there is a kind of informal apprenticeship that I certainly did for many years, for 30 years, 35 years before I ever wrote or said a word about these matters. But it was not in any way a formal training, and certainly didn't lead to any kind of formal qualification. But you're right. So, and even now, as you say, I would never refer to myself as a teacher. Other people refer to me as that, and I understand why. But I never had the desire to be a teacher, nor do I really consider what I'm doing now as teaching. But you're right about the lack of formal qualification. In fact, a very well-respected, well-known academic journal commissioned me recently to write a paper on basically on consciousness, on the nature of personal identity and consciousness. So I wrote the paper, and it was rejected on two grounds. One, that I don't have the requisite formal qualifications, and two, that I don't have a large body of work behind me. Well, of course, I wrote back very politely to the editor. So, why did you commission the article in the first place? You knew, who I am, what I do. If you require all your writers to have a PhD in philosophy, if you think that that's what qualifies them to understand the nature of consciousness, then, and if you don't consider 7 or 8 books and 10 years, 35 years of actually 45 years now of intense study, introspection on these matters, if you don't consider that sufficient qualification, why did you commission the article to begin with? So I don't come across this in the world that I tend to operate in. But as soon as I go just one step out that anywhere towards academia, then I'm just simply not qualified. Why? Because I don't have a PhD in philosophy. As if a PhD in philosophy can tell you anything whatsoever about the nature of consciousness.
Yes, and I think this is my point: is that people are obsessed with things like PhDs and the such like, and which school you've been to. But in my experience, speaking to some psychologists or whatever it may be, it can be somewhat limiting, actually. And I'm just interested to what degree you think perhaps there is an overemphasis on those type of things, because here we are with the two of you who don't have that, but in at least my opinion, and certainly in the opinion of people who like both of your work, whether as a teacher, Rupert, and we'll stick to that for the moment, and as an actor with you, Jamie, it's not required.
No, I think with regards to drama school, which I don't want to sound derogatory about. Obviously, it's a respected and old institution, but many actors are capable despite their training, not because of their training. And there is a risk of them being sort of like a jelly mold, that churns out a very similar product. Whereas if you're lucky enough to formulate your own process in any creative pursuit, you're more likely to retain what makes you unique, or whatever you have to say that's individual. But for me, it was a big thing to go to say publicly. So I think I know the interview you're referencing, Simon, and that was the first time I'd said that I hadn't been trained, that I was self-taught, because I was terrified of being, don't cast him, or don't take him seriously, or he's never going to go beyond a certain point because he's not. Obviously, I'm well past that now, but it was this year that I first spoke publicly about being self-taught. So.
You came out, as it were. Rupert, his comment there about the jelly moulding and this that to some degree, learning by rote, or however you want to call it, can be limiting. Do you have a take on that and what Jamie just said there about jelly moulding in particular?
I see exactly why Jamie mentioned this in relation to drama school and but I think in the field that the field of non-duality, that there's no formal schooling. There are no programs. There, of course, there are traditions: the Buddhist tradition, the Zen tradition, the Kashmir tradition, and so on. And each one has their associated practices, language, etc. But I don't think that they produce people that are of a certain mold in the same way that someone going through a particular training at drama school has gone through all the same exercises, the same voice coaching. I don't think that's the case with non-duality. Of course, you could, to a certain extent, you could say there's a certain mindset that comes with the traditions. In my tradition, as you know, that I use the word I, or self, God. I use these terms very freely. In the Buddhist tradition, they don't like the word I or self. Nothing wrong with either of those two perspectives, but there's either of those two uses of language. But so there's some. Each tradition or lineage has its own particular idiosyncrasies, but I don't think I don't think the traditions churn out a kind of standard product, a standard type of person.
No, but do you think? And sorry to labour the point here, but that society's obsession to some degree with qualifications or pieces of paper, or you've come from this school, you've learnt this way of thinking, etc., means that we're missing out to some degree on a portion of wisdom that society could benefit from. Yeah, Rupert? Broadly speaking.
Yes, I do, but I don't want to. I don't want to imply that qualifications are therefore not valid. Of course they are. You know, neither of us would want to go to a doctor or a dentist who did not have the appropriate qualifications and had not gone through the training and had not been tested by the system to ensure that their theoretical knowledge was actually informing the practical application of it. So that there is a very real need for qualifications testing, etc. But at the same time, yes, academia is a very it's a very narrow mindset, and it's difficult for new radical ideas to penetrate that mindset. It's a very well fortified mindset, and it has its own kind of internal logic that it uses to defend its own parameters and makes it impervious to outside ideas. I was talking. I won't mention any names, but certainly you, Simon, perhaps both of you have heard this interview with a well-known public speaker and a popular podcaster and influencer. And I was basically suggesting to him this consciousness-only model, the idea that basically consciousness is the ultimate reality, which is not, as you both well know, a new idea. It's at least 3,000 years old, if not older. And at one stage in the he was trained as needless to say, a philosopher, a neuroscientist, and he said to me at one stage, "Rupert, where do you get your highfalutin ideas from?"
I know.
It was because his very well reasoned within a very narrow field, his very well reasoned argument was just impervious. It blinded him to another possibility that maybe consciousness was not a product of matter and could just possibly be the ultimate reality. He just could not see it, and not only that, he was dismissive, almost disdainful. I mean, he asked me, where do you get your highfalutin ideas from? And that was this was a public talk. He knew that tens of thousands of people were going to hear it. It was a kind of public put down. He was sort of, he was mocking me, and was bringing well-reasoned, what he considered to be well-reasoned arguments, but well-reasoned arguments chosen from a very narrow field. And it's a pretty impervious wall.
Yeah. I think it's the problem is often one of nuance or lack of. Like, as he said, there are some qualifications and certificates and educational institutes which are essential, such as a brain surgeon or a dentist.
Yeah.
But some are created really to further a business model or an institute that's going to support someone's reputation. But beyond that, people, even particularly surprisingly, people that have quite a staunch grip on a perspective or the value of a certificate, they fail to just check outside those boundaries in case there's a bigger story or a different story. So, for example, a lot of drama school material is based on the work of Stanislavski. Well, Stanislavski never taught acting. His principles were applied sporadically as a director of theatre, but he never taught acting. He did once go to Paris and allowed people to watch him direct. I think that's where Stella Adler met him in his later life. But he never taught acting. And, a lot of actors are associated with the Russian system from Stanislavski or the subsequent American spin-off called The Method. And it is used as an obstacle course over a 2 or 3 year period. But if you actually ask a lot of actors, do they actually use any of it when it comes to the crunch? The answer is no. And this is what I like about Rupert's teaching and pride myself on my process as an actor. Rupert's teaching, his videos, his lectures, his talks and interviews, his books, both allow you to indulge a vast landscape of information. But at the same time, whenever you put the book down because you want to practice, you know how to do it. There's always a summary. There's a constant conclusion, consolidation. Effectively, what Rupert teaches could be written on the back of a stamp, and that is made apparent. And that means that you can easily transition between theory and practice. And the same as an actor. There are actors that have a sort of metaphysical, pseudo-spiritual interpretation of their process. But it can sometimes can float off into the atmosphere, because if you're a busy working actor, it has to be applicable like that. Before you get a call sheet at 9 o'clock at night in your hotel, tomorrow we're going to shoot scenes XYZ. You have the scenes, you read the dialogue, you read the scenes. You're collected the next morning at 6 a.m. You're on set with a coffee, saying hello to people, catching up with friends. The director wants you to do makeup, costume, a rehearsal, and you're on, you're acting. You can't be too ceremonial or too ritualistic or too specific in your requirements, because you're not going to work if you're a busy, consistent. And for me, that's what really impresses me with Rupert's approach to it as a teacher. Is I always feel that I know what to do, even if I get lost. I've just got actually one. I found one of his. I've got this one here, but another book. I found this the other day. The transparency of things. Even when you're getting lost in I want a percentage for that. When you get lost in the eloquence or the terminology or the semantics or the poetry, I always know what to do if I want to close the book and lean back in the sofa or lie down in the bed or go for a walk. And so, it's why you've got to be careful before you make your bed or plant your flag, because if you do it without you doing your research, and you get sort of protective over it, you could be trapped inside something that's insufficient. And it's why I'm glad that it took me a while to find Rupert, and I developed my own process as an actor, because otherwise I might be a staunch defendant of Stanislavski or the method or other approaches,
Yes.
rather than being constantly open.
And I'm glad you say that, Jamie. The close relation between the theory and the practice, and I think the reason for that is because the theory or the lines of reasoning that I speak or write about, they're not drawn from abstract thought, from other lines of reasoning. They're drawn from experience. In fact, this was the answer I gave to this gentleman who asked me, where do you get your highfalutin ideas from? I said a combination of introspection and reason. So all the theory, for want of a better word, if you take the book The Nature of Consciousness, which is, there's quite a lot of reasoning in it, but the reasoning comes direct from experience. It doesn't come because I've read some philosopher and I'm arguing with him or addressing an objection. The reasoning, it's what Atmananda Krishna Menon referred to as higher reasoning, by which he meant reasoning that is derived directly from experience, rather than reasoning that comes from other lines of abstract reasoning. And so I'm very happy to hear, Jamie, that when you read even a book that may be, or a passage that may be a line of reasoning, that it's very close to your actual experience.
Yes. It's funny you say that about experience, because I mean, being the sort of at risk of obsessive when I've studied. So I mean, I've got every book on acting in this cabinet here, from Stanislavski to David Mamet to Lee Strasberg, Stella Adler, blah blah blah, and none of it related to me. And what I decided to do was analyze my experience as an actor. So in my early experiences, what is it that I struggle with? What impedes me? What prevents me from having that experience that I had, not to sound funny, with Pete the first time, because for me, acting is about a removal of impediments, not about an accumulation of techniques. And so I didn't find answers in other people's books or methods. So I tried to break down, okay, what are the consistent, reoccurring obstacles that I come across when I try to be free as an actor? And the first one was, I used to have to get ready. So I'd be like, right, ready? And then I'd act. Well, that's such an ugly transition from a beautiful state of naturalism into some sort of performance. I'm now, so I wanted to slide. I aspired to sliding seamlessly into the next. If I'm talking to a gaffer here with a cup of coffee and someone says, "You're on, Jamie," I can just put the cup down, turn, and start doing like we do in life. Like if my better half walks in right now, I'll just deal with that. Or if the camera goes off, the seamless transitions from one moment to the next. So I invented this word. I think it's not in the dictionary. Maybe it's in the dictionary, but non-restructuring. So I non-restructure. I don't want to restructure before a scene. I'm sat here chilled, either closing my eyes or reading a book or drinking a coffee. Maybe I'm on my mark. So it's a scene at a table. The camera's there. There's another cast member there. We're chatting about the weather. And then the director's in and out checking things. And finally they'll say action, and I'll just carry on. I won't We gotta go. Are we gonna? Okay, 1 second. Okay, ready. Like, no, that's not for what I aspire to as an actor, because I don't want to be like that as a human.
Yeah.
I aspire to being a human in the same way I am as an actor, and vice versa. And so that was the first.
I feel exactly. Sorry, Jamie, did I interrupt you? Go on.
No.
I feel exactly the same way about what I do. That if you were to tell me, okay, in 2 minutes' time, Rupert, you're addressing an audience of 1,000 people. If you told me I was doing it in 20 seconds' time, I would just go, okay, that's fine. Yeah, and we would just like you. I just slide into it exactly as you say. I would just go from having a conversation with you two, and to okay, it's 1,000 people. We'd start. I don't know where we'd start. We'd start with what, and it would be that there'd be no. There wouldn't really be a transition. It would just be an extension of what I'm doing all the time.
Yeah.
You do it in one way when you're talking to two friends. You're doing it another way when you're talking to 1,000 people that you never met before. But it's the same. It's the same quality all the time. Nothing really changes. There's no performance.
Yeah,
exactly.
Well, it's authenticity, isn't it? It's authenticity. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's interesting because obviously, Jamie, your tip that I don't want to keep banging this drum, but your tip for big things and your career has definitely shooting along a pace. Sorry, okay. I promise I won't do it again. But if things are going well for you, and you've drawn the admiration of some people who are held in high esteem in your profession, but it's like you've made acting your own, and the same is true of you, Rupert. Like you have made this understanding your own, whereas this obsession, to go back to the earlier point, with certificates and experts in this sort of limiting field means that then people seem to then play something of a role that is in line with that. And then referring to your highfalutin conversation, and I'm very familiar with the one that you're talking about, Rupert, and that limiting the limiting nature of everything that we've just been talking about means, for example, that the actually highfalutin model of materialism cannot easily be questioned, and in our experience, more evidently true model of consciousness only, in our experience, cannot be accepted. So it just seems to have been followed on quite interestingly that here are two people who have really owned things and as a result been very successful through it, compared to the more traditional perhaps way of doing things, which then keeps things like you said, Rupert, down this very narrow path and keeps this non-dual understanding out in the blooming periphery, which is very irritating.
There's a price to pay in being a specialist. If you have the comparison between a generalist and a specialist, we need specialists. A dentist, for example, and if he doesn't have much else going on in his day-to-day existence, that's fine, as long as he's a good dentist. But I think we, for some reason, frown on generalism a bit too much in contemporary society. I used to study under an Israeli movement coach called Ido Portal, who advocated generalism from a physical perspective. But because if you're a ski jumper, that specialism will wear out certain joints, and you'll age prematurely as a result. Where if you go for walks and do a bit of yoga and do a bit of sauna and maybe swim now and again and maybe play a bit of amateur tennis as you both now and again, you're going to have a broader base where you're not going to wear out any particular component prematurely. But also, philosophically, to be a generalist, for me, I don't want to use the word a Renaissance individual, but to have a slightly broader view of the world, to empathize or at least understand multiple perspectives, but also to invert that, where if you can take your speciality, which, because arguably the hypocrisy here is I am a specialist and so is Rupert, but it overflows, it percolates into other aspects of life where I can't separate acting or living anymore. I learn all of my acting from living and vice versa. And it's obviously apparent with Rupert that it's not this. I don't think Rupert's going to finish this podcast and go and scream at his wife or his partner.
No. Rupert lives it, and that's yes, totally.
Tell the neighbours to shut up with a broom.
Absolutely, and that is the proof in the pudding, I think, and I think that's something that Jamie, you and I have spoken about this. That is really stands out for Rupert is that it comes through. You do live what you talk about, where other people, I think, perhaps don't to quite the same degree. Anyway, listen, I'm sorry. Go on, Rupert.
Go on.
No, because I was just going to move the conversation on so that you say something.
I was just going to say that I think, in both what Jamie and I are doing, there's a certain amount you can train for, in Jamie, in your world. There are techniques and everything. Obviously, and in my world, you can study, you can learn the scriptures, etc. But it's really, and we could, in a way, that's what we learn on a horizontal plane. But really, to do well what we're both doing, and it really goes for any art form. I think it's really, yes, you have to study on a horizontal level, but it's really the depth that informs what you do. And and Simon, you know this in sports as well, but in the arts, sport, you can be brilliant technically. You can study a great deal. That doesn't necessarily make you very good at what you do. It's the depth you bring, and that really qualifies what you do, and that is what, as an actor, that's what is really communicated, and that I don't think you can train for that. It's the depth of your understanding, your deep humanity that you bring to bear on every part you play, and that's what has the power to communicate something to your audience. And I think it's exactly the same in what I do as well. If I could read all of Ramana Maharshi and Atmananda and be able to recite it all, that would not qualify me to be good at doing what I'm doing. I think this is true but it's especially true in the arts. What we're speaking of, it's really the depth of one's understanding, the depth of one's humanity that informs whatever it is one has learnt and studied on a horizontal.
I think you've summarised pretty well there, Rupert, what I've been trying to muddle my way into actually saying. But just when you say the depth, do you mean the degree to which you make it your own, the degree to which you fully live it yourself?
I think it's partly that, but it's also one's understanding, one's sensitivity that informs. Well, in acting, informs the role you play. Thinking, Jamie, of you having to act the feeling of sorrow where your coach, I think you said your coach had just died or been murdered. Now, anybody can fake a feeling of sorrow, but how are you going to really communicate the depth of that experience wordlessly to an audience? You probably learn at acting school how to cry when you don't particularly feel like it, and there's certain expression, but that's not enough. That will just produce a good or mediocre performance. But if you're going to stir people's heart, if you're going to touch people's hearts, you've got to be able to do more than just turn on the tears when you're feeling sad, or quote Ramana Maharshi in response. It's got to, and the people that we're speaking, the people that I'm speaking to, the people that you're acting to, Jamie, that they're sensitive,
Exactly.
intelligent, that they cannot be easily fooled.
Exactly.
That they're people. So it's this depth and experience and understanding that is required to really touch people's hearts, and that can't be learned.
For me, what you're discussing there is guiding the audience through a transition from one of passive sympathy to active empathy.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
And
Yes.
because, some actors that maybe I don't rate that much do pride themselves in something at being able to cry on cue. But first of all, it's not true. You're just making your eyes water effectively. But also, the human experience and the exchange of humanity between people, language, communication is so complex, nuanced. From body language to expressions to breath pattern to interaction with the environment. Um, you've got to respect the audience, that everyone has a firm grasp of communication, and if you want to really move the audience towards something similar to a state of awe, then it's not necessarily about indulging emotions, it's about battling emotions. If you watch me indulge an emotion right now, and I'm crying and I'm blowing my nose, and like, there is an element of embarrassment because you would say, "Oh God, Jamie, okay? Do you want us to pause and maybe do this tomorrow or whatever?" Where if I told you a story about a family member who helped raise me, and my voice starts to crack, and I resist, I fight back tears rather than squeeze out tears. That stirs something in us. If you've ever seen a man being interviewed in the news when his house is burned down and maybe someone's died in the fire, and he's trying to keep on a brave face, and he's trying to stop, hold back the tears in order to do this interview with the it moves you far more than someone indulging emotions. And that's a paradox, but paradox again is part of what we're talking about.
I tell you, that's very fascinating because I think clearly acting is an art, and I would describe you both as artists. Rupert, obviously, you were a potter, and I would not describe myself as one. So it's slightly acting, I would say, as I've said to Jamie on numerous conversations, goes over my head. But what you've just said there actually really resonates with me a lot. But following on from that theme, Rupert, what makes a good acting performance as far as you're concerned?
First thing I want to say, Simon, is that I don't think you should deny the artist in yourself. You spent a lot of time interviewing people, and I'm sure you've also watched listened to lousy interviewers, but
Oh yeah.
I bet you've also listened to some really good interviews. I consider interviewing it's an art. You have two people in front of you. Well, you and I know each other a little bit, Simon, but you didn't know. Neither of us knew you, Jamie. I know you've had a few conversations, but we don't know each other well. Let's put it like that. And yet, you want to have a conversation that you don't want to just talk about where we were born and where we went to school. You've got an hour and a half to draw something out of our hearts. Well, that you can't learn that at journalism school or that's a real art. Where to intervene, where to step back, the very pertinent question, not too personal, but a little. I mean, it's an art form, Simon. What you're
Agreed.
doing. Don't say, "Oh, you two are artists, and I'm not an artist, and you've got possibly a career ahead of you doing this." I would say you are an artist, and like all art forms, they can be refined and refined and refined, and it's really the depth of our sensitivity that refines our art form. All three of us, we're reasonably eloquent. We can speak. We're articulate and everything. But that so we don't need to go to voice school. But it's the depth of our understanding and sensitivity and empathy that is going to really polish our three respective art forms. Anyway, sorry, that was
that's a very kind thing to say, Rupert. I just want to express my gratitude because I never thought of it in those terms. I just sort of think of art as whether it be pottery or painting or acting, those kind of things. I'd never thought of it in those terms. So, but yes, I see what you mean.
I understand. Just one other thing to say about that. I understand why you say that, Simon, because you're a genuinely humble person, but you have to be careful about being self-deprecating, because if you say, "Oh, what I do is not art," then what you do won't be art. So we limit ourselves with the ideas we have about ourselves. So, and I don't mean to suggest you should go around saying you're a great artist. Jamie would never go around saying. He even gets embarrassed when you say he's becoming increasingly wrong. I don't even like to call myself a teacher, but yes, of course, there's a natural humility that we all, that many people feel. We don't like to put ourselves up, and that isn't inverted egotism. It's genuine humility. But at the same time, we should be careful not to have limiting ideas about ourselves, because we will limit ourselves.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting.
So, sorry, I've now forgotten what your question was.
My question just was, what makes for you, following on from what Jamie was saying, what makes for you a good acting performance? What do you think constitutes a really great actor or actress?
I think a great actor or actress is able to take you to a place in yourself that you weren't able to go on your own. Not just to press your button and re-evoke the childhood wound, the upset you caused when your relationship fell apart. No, I'm not. I don't mean to criticize that. That's a valid thing to do. That's a good act. A good actor can do that. But a great actor or a great actress, that I think their purpose is that the role they serve, like any great artist in society, is to take us to a place in ourselves, which is in ourselves, but that we were not able to get to on our own. That's the service a great actor or actress or indeed artist does, a great musician does for humanity. And then I went this weekend to hear Imogen Cooper playing the Beethoven Diabelli Variations, which he wrote right at the end of his life in a local church here, solo piano, and it's just the power of that music and the power of the way she played it. And the way she involved the audience. It was just breathtaking. It's like she just carried us into the heart of the music, and it was awesome. I mean, awesome in the real sense. It was powerful and awesome and poignant, and it was just immensely powerful. And it takes a great artist to be able to do that. So that's what I feel the role of a really good actor or actress is.
Which reminds me of a comment that I've heard you say quite a few times, which is that, and correct me if I get it wrong, art should give a taste of nature's eternity. Is that right?
I'm quoting Cézanne there.
Right. Yes.
Cézanne said of his painting that although what we're actually looking at, nature, the changing face of nature, so that although what we're looking at all the time is continually changing, and all a painter has is his or her paints, that the purpose of art is not just to reproduce the changing face of nature. It is, in his words, to give us a taste of nature's eternity, that which doesn't change in nature, that which is eternal, that which underlies the appearance. And so he's saying that's, which of course, that nature's eternity, we are of course a part of nature. So nature's eternity is our true self, the reality of ourself. So it in Cézanne's language, the purpose of his painting was to take us to that aspect of ourself that is eternal. And his role as a painter was to take the viewer there, because they couldn't go there by themselves. That was his role, to take them there. And the same as the role as of an actor or an actress, or and of an interviewer. Simon, your role is to gently guide the two people talking to a place where they perhaps wouldn't get if they were just on their own talking. You have to be sensitive. You have to steer. Although we should not really be aware of you, the listeners should not really be just your homeopathic interventions should somehow facilitate the conversation that perhaps Jamie and I wouldn't have on our own together. We would no doubt have a very interesting, lively conversation, but we might not manage to just dip down a layer deeper. So yes, that's the role of art in the broadest sense of the word, in Cézanne's phrase, to give us, to give the viewer, the hearer, the listener, the seer, the taster, the smeller, whoever it is, a taste of nature's eternity.
Have you got anything to, or how do you relate to that quote of Cézanne's, Jamie, in terms of your acting?
There's another quote by there's a quote which seems to be regurgitated through the ages. I think Picasso said, "Art is a lie that tells the truth," or something along those lines. And Albert Camus said, "The poet is the poet is a liar who tells the truth." And then there's a similar one by I can't remember, but yeah, I mean, I've no idea. I wouldn't want to maybe state what I think is a great performance.
So why don't you tell us what you think the quotes that you've just shared there? Why don't you? What do they mean to you? What are they trying to convey?
There is a lie. You know, I'm saying words that were given to me in the form of a script. I am assuming a different name, a different way of walking, or a different costume, and I'm indulging impulses or processes that are maybe not natural to the identity of Jamie. So there is an element, you could argue, I guess, from a non-dualistic perspective, or swapping one lie for another, one lowercase t truth for another. So that's the false side of it, the character, the role. But the truth part is my experience within that moment. You know, it's a bit like the use of non-meditation or non-effort. You know, it's non-acting is what I strive for. Sure, there's some moments where I have to act. You know, a very short scene, opening a door as a pickup or a filler between two bigger, longer scenes. Sure, but for me, acting is those moments where I am in a state of being rather than a state of doing, and I really am experiencing whatever comes to me in that scene, in that take. I'm trying to achieve something real. And that's truth. That's as real as it can get. There's no performance there, you know. So
that non-acting that Jamie said there, Rupert, that reminds me of what you say in terms of it's a non-practice. self-abidance is a non-practice.
Yes. Self-abidance is what we are, not what we do. We can't practice. Jamie, you never rehearse being Jamie. You rehearse being King Lear or Julius Caesar or whoever you're playing, but you don't rehearse being Jamie because, relatively speaking, you are Jamie. It doesn't need any rehearsal. So it's the same. We don't have to being what we are is not something we have to practice. Most of us practice most of the time without realizing it, being what we are not. And so for one who has spent 2, 3, 4, 5 decades practicing, albeit inadvertently, what they are not, namely the ego or separate self, it seems to begin with to require an effort to return to what we are. So that effort that we seem to have to make, the effort that the apparently separate self or ego seems to have to make, is an effort that we have to make. We have to do it, or we seem to have to do it. And then when this recognition, or even just this glimpse of what we essentially are, then that comes with it, the recognition, what I am is what I am. It's not what I do. It's not something I have to practice. So then the effort gives way to effortlessness. Doing gives way to being.
Yeah. And two things there, one on a lower level, one on a higher that'll maybe take us elsewhere. The terms often used, character or role, I'm very particular about how they're used, because for me, there is no character. It doesn't really exist. Like, even a well-written, well-researched, played over the centuries, like King Lear, what we know about him is relatively little compared to what we know about our neighbor, or what our, you don't know what King Lear had for breakfast on Wednesday. So you have a role. And if you think of a coin, on one side of the coin is the actor, and the other side of the coin is the role. And when you spin the coin, you create the illusion of character. That's how I see it. And that's how I use the words.
You said there are no characters, only roles. I mean, that's the essence of what you teach in some ways, Rupert. No?
Yes. No. Ultimately, no individual people, only activities. And going even further, no discrete, independently existing objects or entities. Ultimately, the universe is not a collection of objects. It is the activity of consciousness. In other words, that in the new language of non-duality, there would be no nouns. It would all be verbs. It would be the one reality interacting with itself, appearing as the universe to a localized perspective. So the universe, as we know it, a multiplicity and diversity of discrete objects, only seeming such from a temporary and local point of view. So only being the object, only being an object in relation to a localized subject. But that is just a temporary crystallizing, not even a crystallization. It is just a temporary moment in the activity of the whole. So at no point in time do any real discrete subjects or objects come into existence with their own discrete and independent existence. It's all the interplay of one seamless reality interacting with itself and appearing as a multiplicity and diversity, but never actually being so. So sorry, I was taking your question onto rather a large scale.
No.
But yes, ultimately, that there are no there are activities, not characters.
Yeah. Just to flip it a little bit, And just so you know, by the way, I'm going to go a little bit over the 90 minutes, just as an
Great.
FYI. I hope that's all right with both of you.
Yeah.
Um, just to flip it a little bit, we've talked a lot about acting, but uh, Rupert, you were a potter and a distinguished one for a long time before uh, your calling to make bowls out of words became so pronounced and and you were so in demand that you had to let it go. What is the relationship, in your opinion, between pottery as an art and non-dualism?
And please explain the bowls out of words thing as well,
Oh
please.
yeah, I mentioned this to Jamie, and he was
All
intrigued
right.
when I said it.
All right. Let me start with that story, and apologies to our listeners who have heard it before, because I think I wrote about it in the forward of a recent book. Anyway, so Jamie, I for many years, 30, 25, 30 years, made pots and increasingly just bowls. And over the years, the bowls got larger and finer and more open. I was stretching the material more and more, and indeed, very often the bowls would collapse. You imagine making a shape like this is quite a vertical, a deep vertical bowl is quite a stable shape. But the wider it becomes, the more it tends towards flat and open, the more the force of gravity will tend to collapse. So the bowls would get wider, larger, finer, more and more open. And at the same time, I was originally with a needle, in fact, not just a needle, but a sharpened needle. I would sharpen a needle in order to get a slight burr on the point of the needle, so that it wasn't just a point, it was a slightly rough point. And then with that rough point, I would incise lines very close, literally a millimeter or so apart on bowls. It would take me several days, 8, 9, 10 days to draw these very fine lines all over these large bowls, which were kind of undulating in shape because they were kind of collapsing. And then one day when I was drawing these lines, the idea came to me: why don't you start writing? Just start writing. Instead of drawing lines, start writing. It was a small step from drawing a line to writing. So then this was the advent of the poem bowls. So then these very large bowls, I would write poems all over them in a kind of small, illegible script. Again, they would take several days. So there was this process of writing poems, words on bowls, and I wanted the bowls to get larger, more open, wider, more transparent, lighter. And in the end, and then this idea came to me, and it just was one of those ideas that came to me kind of unsolicited. It wasn't the extension of a previous line of thing. It just came out of nowhere. And it was just, I wish I could make bowls just out of words. As the bowls in they were, over the years, they started very earthy and heavy, and they became more and more transparent. I'd taken the bowls really as far as I could take them. They couldn't have been larger, more open, finer. And when then writing words, and there was just this idea: I'd like the bowl to evaporate completely, and I wish I could find a medium where I didn't even require the clay. I could just make bowls, transparent forms out of words. So I had this thought, just out of the blue, and then I just carried on working. But within 2 years, I had stopped making pots, and I had started speaking about these matters, giving meditations. And really, the meditations, I realized it was some time, 2, 3, 4 years later, that I looked back on this instant in my studio when this thought had come to me: I want to make bowls out of words. That I realized actually that's what these guided meditations are. That they are bowls out of words. That the physical substance has evaporated, and that now there's just these forms out of words. So that was the
Can I add a similar experience? Uh, I used to be quite guilty of being so preoccupied as an actor with staying calm and other challenges and obstacles that I was sometimes guilty of not fully absorbing the text, the script, the dialogue. And I'd perhaps during a take stumble because I hadn't fully absorbed the text, the dialogue. And as I became freer and freer as an actor and clearer of my process, which became more and more simple, a respect for the writing came. And to such a point where I eventually wrote a note in my book, in my notebook, um, which was let the words do the acting. So, if someone's taken a great deal of time to write and redraft and rewrite and redraft and finally lock in a script with dialogue, that is a form of magic. It's a form of it's the same way. If I say apple, there's an apple in your consciousness now, a red apple with a bite out of it. You see that to some extent, like words are magic, and there's a Russian cinematic technique called the Kuleshov effect, and basically they have someone's face, and then they'll cut to a crying baby, or they'll cut to a beautiful woman, or they'll cut to a big sumptuous meal, and then they'll cut back to the plain face, and you'll swear blind the face has changed, but it's you superimposing your own reaction onto this blank canvas of the blank face. That, along with this greater respect for the writing, caused me to arrive at this place where I wrote, let the words do the acting. It doesn't mean I can't sometimes rise to great heights and be bravura and really try and bring the house down. But at the same time, you can sometimes step back a little and let the words do the acting.
Yes.
And it feels very similar to what happened with your bowls.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
You've said, haven't you, Jamie, that when you act, you want to reveal in people something in them that perhaps they were not even aware of themselves.
Yeah, I don't know if I could make such a bold claim. I just want to celebrate the currency of sincerity and vulnerability. That's all. If I can stand there in a way, do nothing, which is much harder than you'd think, to do nothing, because we do a lot to protect, to prevent, to preserve, to present. But if I can really celebrate the currency of humility and sincerity and viscerality and vulnerability, even if you're playing a Roman general, that's where there's the beauty of paradox, where I have to command the troops or convince the Senate, but at the same time, I'm terrified that they go against my plans, my family will be murdered. That's paradox. And when an audience member sees that, that's what it makes the audience member a voyeur, and we're celebrating the drama of life and the complexity of the human experience,
Yes.
So that was very highfalutin, but the answer is really, I'm not trying to highlight to people what they maybe don't know. If that happens, great. But I'm certainly trying to just be as sincere as possible, and because that for me is a form of currency, and I try and use that currency in life. I try and be within the boundaries, the confines of the circumstance or society. I'll try and be sincere. So I'm not embarrassed or shy of if there is some anxiety or shyness or uncertainty. And ironically, however, when you go towards, as Rupert teaches, the two options, go back and go forward, when you go towards the obstacle and welcome it, legitimize it, embrace it, if you take the opponent into the clinch, you look around and it's gone.
Do you know what? Sorry, I was taken out on Friday night by a couple of friends to celebrate my recent wedding. And someone said something that it was a line that really stuck with me. Actually, I wrote it down. I thought I'll pass it off as my own in an upcoming newsletter. And it relates to what you just said there, Jamie. And he said something like, it's about getting secure with your insecurity.
That's a nice way to
does that resonate with what you're just saying there?
Roles like Burns, we're hoping to do a film about Robert Burns, which I know would interest Rupert from a poetic perspective. But Burns really, was a self-made man, a self-educated man to some extent, from a very humble background, but rose through the echelons of society in his lifetime. He was on a stamp in Russia shortly after his death. He was translated into Chinese. I'm not saying that Burns was secure with his insecurity, but that turmoil of him, partly trying to celebrate himself, but at the same time almost presenting himself, is a fascinating role to play.
But you also said you're in yourself, that you don't want to be awkward with shyness or anything like that, and that
not anymore. Maybe I started with that ambition. The semantics are very precise, but okay. So remember the term I used, non-restructuring. That is an aspirational term. Like, I can still feel an urge to restructure sometimes, but I remind myself of the importance of non-restructuring. I don't slide into every scenario seamlessly without some friction. But when I notice the friction, I remind myself, non-restructuring, or what I nickname ready. So I have a handful of these terms. There's usually a longer one, like non-contraction or non-identification. And then they have shorter nicknames. So for non-restructuring, it's just ready. Just always be ready, But that doesn't mean that is in a state of autopilot. I sometimes have to remind myself, you're non-restructuring. Don't just, But you've got to be careful that you don't become combative with these things. So as Rupert says so often, you can't say, I'm going to surrender or welcome this thing in order to get rid of it. You just welcome it. And as Rupert says, ask the question, could I live with this forever? But then ironically, if you look around, it does dissipate. But
yeah.
Paradox.
Yeah, well, yes, absolutely. Right, I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to throw a few quick fires at you. Jamie, you say that during our conversations before we hopped on this recording, you say that self-abidance is a key part of acting for you. So your interest in non-duality, your interest in in Rupert's teachings, for example, makes you a better actor. And to what degree, or rather, how does self-abidance help in acting?
It's a safety valve, So ideally, you'd start in a state of relative awareness, in a position of self-abidance, so a blank canvas. And then you allow yourself to experience the myriad of things, thoughts, feelings, interactions, prop use, whatever. But at the end of the day, or the end of the take, or end of the scene, to return full circle to some form of awareness, self-abidance. It just stops you maybe taking things home, or coming in with already full pockets,
Yeah. And you've talked about the balance between being and doing.
Yeah, it's a sliding scale, I'd say, because sometimes you have to do, like I said, if it's a scene where you've done the big scene, which was sincere and real. Then there's a quick close up of this angle, just where you grab the steering wheel. You just have to grab the steering wheel and act that you've suddenly grabbed the steering wheel. So it's a sliding scale. But why I act is because I enjoy having the scale way down towards the realm of being. And I think that's what constitutes a great performance, a timeless performance, is when it's more like safari. You're capturing something. You're blurring the boundaries between dramatization and documentary. It's, regardless of what he's called or calling himself or wearing or being told what to wear, you're capturing something sincere that's real. And And I think increasingly with modern society, with social media and less person-to-person interaction, to celebrate that or to showcase that is just going to become more important, you know.
And clearly, an important part of acting or any art is creativity, as Rupert said, sensitivity. Rupert, what is the relationship then between awareness and those things?
And creativity, sensitivity.
Yeah, all those things.
Well, awareness is pure sensitivity. That's what awareness is. It's another name for awareness: pure sensitivity, pure open registering, pure open knowing, without the least film of resistance. It is sensitivity.
Oh, that's nice.
A great one. That's worth the podcast in itself.
Yeah, that's a cracking line.
Yeah.
And what about creativity?
Creativity. Well, creativity is when something new created, so to speak. It's when something new comes into the situation. So it is the source of creativity. So creativity is not an extension of the past. So let's relate this to acting. You may have rehearsed a scene 100 times, and to get it absolutely perfect, you're with your fellow actors and actresses, and you've all researched. You've got it. You can do it standing on your head. You've done it so many times. You all know. And then the performance comes, and when you act the scene, you have to forget. And the same is true of sports, Simon. I know you know this is exactly the same. You could take training, a training session. You can train for free kicks and corners and hundreds of times. But then in the moment, you have to let go of the part. You cannot think, okay, we're just going to do what we've done 100 times before. That doesn't work. That has to be so much a part of you that you don't need to think of it. But you have to let it go, because that's what lets something new come into the situation, which you have never rehearsed before, which nobody has ever seen before. That requires a vertical drop into your being rather than going back in time into your knowledge. So you drop. It's a vertical intervention of being in the line of time, and Simon, I know that you've talked to many sports people. That there are examples of that in sports, inspired moments in sport, and I'm sure in acting, Jamie, I can well imagine that you sometimes you act something and afterwards you think, oh, I've never done that before. Where did that come from? And you don't know where it came. Well, it didn't come from your past. It didn't come from something you knew. But it didn't come from outside of yourself. Nobody put it into you. It came from yourself. It came from the depths of yourself. It came from awareness.
You've spoken about the vertical dimension before, Rupert, and I had a few people ask me what you meant by that. So this seems like a good opportunity to ask you, what do you mean by that? For perhaps people who perhaps can't quite grasp it, and how can one get better access to the vertical dimension or sink into oneself?
Let's say we were to ask somebody now, tell us about yourself. And then the normal answer, well, of course, for someone who's not familiar with our language, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm a mother or a father, I'm a policeman or a nurse or a bus driver or a musician, or I'm one of 3 children. All of this would be knowledge about ourselves that comes from the past. It's part of the storyline in time. That's what I call the horizontal dimension, this dimension of our history. But if we said, no, don't tell us about that. Tell us about who you are prior to any experience that you've ever had, prior to anything that's ever happened to you. They're going to be, for a moment, there'll be a moment of frustration because all someone finds if they look back into their past is their experience, what's happened to them. And now we've said, no, don't tell us about what's happened to you. Tell us about yourself. And where are they going to go to access their self? They can't go into the future. The past is no longer a possibility. That's the story about what's happened to them, about what they've experienced. No, we want to know about themselves. So someone who is sensitive and understands and is not defended at that moment will stop reaching into the past, stop reaching along the horizontal line of time for knowledge about themselves. And at that moment, there is the possibility that they will plunge into themselves, into the depths of their self now, not the extension. They won't reach back for who they were as a 2-year-old child or what their parents did to them. Or that's what I call the plunge into the vertical dimension of being, into the depths of ourself.
Yes. I'm glad you said the word frustration there, Rupert, because I've had this conversation a couple of times recently, and along these lines of, okay, who are you without your story? Without all your roles, without all your experiences, etc. And my experience is people do get frustrated, and it can be a bit of a...
Yes, it's good. That moment of frustration is a great opportunity. If it is handled sensitively, then the frustration is really a symptom of the fact that they can't find what they're looking for where they're looking for it.
In the mind, you mean?
They're looking in their past experience, in their objective experience. And they realize, having exhausted that what they're looking for, namely their self, cannot be found there. So for the mind that is looking in the past for their self, that is a moment of frustration. Now, if there is a certain sensitivity in the conversation, the person can just be very subtly reorientated. You give a hint as to it's not really the direction, it's the directionless direction in which to look. No, don't look in your past. Don't look in the future. Who is yourself now? When you say the words, I am, what do you refer to now? And a mind that is not fixed and defended, but a mind that is subtle and open, that is a great opportunity. So the feeling of frustration is a great opportunity. Or sometimes somebody will say, well, once you said, no, you're not your relationships, you're not your thoughts, you're not your activities. These are all added to you. Who are you prior to all of that? They may say, I don't know. That I don't know is a great moment of opportunity, because it opens the door in the back of the mind. In fact, it doesn't open the door. The door is always open, but it reorientates us to go in this directionless direction. We're not going towards something that we are. It invites us to go deeper into ourselves. So that moment of frustration, or even the thought, I don't know, is like the threshold.
Yes.
That before we begin to sink into our being, rather than reaching for ourselves as a person, as a character.
So just and Jamie, apologies for this, but so just on the one hand, if someone would say I don't know, and then that's a slight opening, the door is ever so slightly ajar. If someone is defensive in that situation, would you step back and not engage with that? Would you not persist with that line of conversation?
Simon, I can't answer that question generally, because I don't know. I don't have a bag full of strategies. It depends. Sometimes I would push a bit further. I might say, "What you mean? You don't know yourself?" No, don't be silly. You know yourself more intimately than you know anything else. You can't. So sometimes I might challenge someone when they say I don't know. Somebody else might say I don't know, and I might say that's the most intelligent thing you've said all afternoon. That's the sorry, not the most intelligent, the most accurate thing you said. So it depends. I don't have a repertoire of techniques. I'm just open. Do I
Yeah,
push? Do I challenge? Do I question? Do I step back? Do I leave it in silence? But I don't mean to imply that I work any of that out. It's spontaneous.
sure. But
It's
one thing
spontaneous.
that you are is sensitive, and you need
It,
to deal with
it,
it
requires,
sensitively.
it requires sensitivity, not having I also must be free of the past. I can't just bring a series of techniques. Oh, ask yourself, who am I? Or on whose behalf does this feeling? No, I can't just respond, oh, there's nobody here, there's nothing to do. I can't respond to every question with a pre-formulated response. I have to, of course, I've got 45 years of exploration and study behind me, but I need to forget all of that and just be open and sensitive to the conversation and to trust what comes up. And if nothing comes up, to trust the silence and not to try to fill the silence with with knowledge from the past. And I imagine that acting is a bit like that. It's what you said very early on in that, when your director Peter asked you, and you said, "I threw myself off the ledge." There, what you're saying really is that I let go of anything that I knew, that I was sure of. I was in unfamiliar territory, and that's what allows the spontaneity, the creativity, and that's when you can be sure that if you act like that, or in my case, if you speak with someone, and there's an equivalent, of course, in your world as well, Simon. For you, it would be you're going to interview someone. You spend 3 days preparing a script. You've got 12 questions lined up. And they say something in the first sentence. You just abandon your question. You don't
Yeah,
refer to them again
yeah,
because
yeah,
you've got the confidence to let go of what you know. And that's when the real conversation happens, because everybody is in this openness, this sensitivity. We're not referring to the past. That's when something really creative happens, and the
yeah.
audience, whether it's the audience at a game, at a performance, at a meeting, whatever it is, that the audience, then they feel something, they participate in something that is truly creative and magical.
And you can feel that, and
Oh, you
that's
you
and
you,
that's
you feel it. You absolutely.
and I have to say, having
Can
watched a
I
few of
ask a
Jamie's
question?
videos, I think that comes through. Anyway, go off to you, after you, Jamie.
Sorry, it was just you used the term direction a lot there in that answer. Can I ask a question that may betray a lack of understanding, but regardless, I know you often teach there are two primary uh, processes or directions. This idea of if you have an obstacle, something that challenges you, say a physical pain or a difficult emotion, one option is to, and I think you sometimes say it's the difference between Advaita and
Tantra.
the Tantric approach, where one option is to lean back and abide as the self. So you're able to distinguish, to label this problem as just another activity of the mind, just another transient thought or feeling. So there's the say the direction this way, okay. But then another option is to go this way, where you go closer, you pull it towards you, you embrace it, which may inspire the question, could I live with this forever? And once the answer is yes, it seems to. Can those two processes, and again, apologies if this is a silly question, which maybe is more obvious than I've taken the time to think about, could those happen simultaneously? Do they combine into a sort of pathless path, or this idea of leaning away, leaning back, while can it be done at the same time as leaning forwards? As in, does that even make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. Just to let me just give a practical example of what you're referring to, Jamie, for someone that may be listening and might not be able to connect what you've said, which is an accurate description, but may not be able to connect it to their experience. So, for instance, let's take a feeling. I'm sad. So the two approaches that you describe. The first approach, which is more characteristic of the Vedantic approach, we explore the I. When we say I am sad, we ignore the sadness. We just turn away from the sadness. Who is this I or self around whom or to whom the feeling of sadness comes? So that's an exploration of ourself. We turn away from the content of experience, the sadness, towards ourself. This is the Vedantic approach. So what I sometimes refer to as the Tantric approach, which is more inclusive or embracing of the content of experience. We tend to neglect the I, the self, and we embrace the sadness. We turn towards the sadness. We welcome it. We bring it close. And if we bring it so close that there's absolutely no resistance to it, then what would be left of the sadness if we no longer resisted it? There would no longer be any suffering. It would no longer be sadness as such. So can we do both these? And as you mentioned earlier, Jamie, I sometimes illustrate this with the two boxers in the Vedantic approach. The two boxers go to their respective corners. They take a step away from each other, but when they want safety from the heat of the danger in the middle of the match, they collapse onto each other in a clinch. That would be the Vedantic approach. Can you do both simultaneously? Well, it's a bit like saying, can you take a step back into your respective corners and at the same time embrace your opponent? Obviously, not literally. Take the statement again, I feel sad. In the Vedantic approach, we explore the I. In the Tantric approach, we turn towards the feeling. Forget the I. We forget the I. We turn towards the sadness. I feel sad. Forget the I. Forget the sadness. There is just feeling. There is no self that is feeling it. There is no emotion that is being felt. There is just pure feeling. That would be the way to do both simultaneously.
Which is reality.
To say to yourself, instead of saying, I feel sad, take away the subject and the object, you could just say, just experience feeling. Don't experience the I, don't experience the sadness, don't step away, don't go towards, just there is feeling. That would be the equivalent of doing both simultaneously.
And that collapsing, Rupert, that is reality, isn't it?
Yes, ultimately, the separate subject of experience and the separate object of experience are never really have no independent existence. But the reality, pure feeling. Well, we have to reduce pure feeling into knowing, because feeling itself is a coloring of knowing, consciousness. In other words, feeling is not always present, but the stuff feeling is made of, pure knowing or consciousness, it is reality. And whichever of those three paths you take, you go towards the I, you go to pure consciousness. You go outwards towards the content of experience, you end up with consciousness. And you dispense with the subject and the object, you go to pure seeing, feeling, seeing, hearing, and you go to the essence of that experience. You come to pure knowing. Yes, whichever of those three pathways you take, you come to reality.
All good. Right, listen, final question, and it's for you, Jamie. You're very familiar with Rupert's metaphors. Is King Lear and John Smith your favourite for obvious reasons?
It's certainly one of them. I do like his boxer ones as well. But yeah, I'd say the King Lear is one of my favorites, if not.
And how does that, how do you think of that as an actor?
Well, in a way, there's an acting lesson in it. It advocates the immersion of oneself in a role to generate the illusion of character, but at the same time highlights the importance of returning to not just Jamie, but your true self, your yourself, capital S. So in a way, it's a very concise and very complete acting lesson.
There you go. Anything to add to that, Rupert?
I think no, that was a very good summary of it. Jamie, was there anything else you wanted to ask about or discuss or explore?
No, I mean, I could be tempted to kind of push further with that question about the two directions, but again, maybe I've not thought about it enough, and I'd cringe after realizing that actually it's a silly question. But I think it's because what gave rise to it is that you do seem generally to give equal advocation of both methods. You seem to advocate or support or be in praise of both methods, the tantric, the Vedantic, backwards, forwards, whatever. So I think what gave rise to the question was, well, what if you combined them? And then initially, when I kind of ruminated over that myself on long walks along the river that I've told Simon about, I thought, well, could one be in relative self-abidance? I'd never wanted to describe myself as, well, I mean, there's a semantic puzzle there as well, but could you sort of lean back, but at the same time welcome in, anyway, it's more of a linguistic puzzle.
Yes. Well, I wonder, Jamie, you're familiar with the yoga meditations that I
yes.
do. Yes. So in those meditations, which are really, we explore, as you know, the experience of the body and the world. In those meditations, we always start, in a way, in order to engage with the yoga meditations, we have to first have explored, who am I? And we have to have traced our way back through the layers of experience and recognized I am the open, empty space of awareness. And it's really as that space of awareness. In the yoga meditations, we stand as that space, and we experience the body as a sensation or a network of sensations appearing in that space,
which we then
ultimately made of, and we welcome them, and we go on welcoming. But remember, the we in this case is we awareness. We're not doing this as a person. It is we, the space of awareness, the space of pure sensitivity, pure openness. So we experience this tension, this knot of sensation, and the sensation is welcomed. But really, as the welcoming deepens, the sensation dissolves into the space of awareness. That, in a way, would be that would be the experiential answer to your question. You explore the.
That helps.
Yes,
a lot.
Good.
Bingo. Fantastic. Well, listen, I just want to say it's been a real pleasure spending time with both of you, Jamie. You've been a joy to get to know over the last couple of days, and to actually finally see you in the flesh is fantastic. Rupert, always a pleasure. So, I just want to say, for me, it's been lovely. Thank you very much. And if any final words from either of you to each other in particular, then please go ahead.
Simon, first of all, thank you for sharing this conversation with us. Jamie, lovely to meet you. I think I'm right in saying you're working on a new film at the moment. Very much look forward to seeing it, and just to seeing how your career goes in general. And let's keep in touch. It's been lovely to speak, and let's. I hope our paths will cross again.
Me too. Lovely to meet you.
Lovely. All right. Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for listening as well.